This week, we welcome Graeme Cantu Park, Chief Information Security Officer at Matillion, for a CISO interview on cybersecurity challenges in growth organizations. In the Leadership and Communication section, why cybersecurity is really a business problem, 6 reasons your strategy isn't working, 5 cities with the highest tech salaries, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Most breaches are caused by exploiting oversights in basic cybersecurity fundamentals, but complex hybrid multi-cloud infrastructures make cybersecurity hygiene challenging. Red Seal can help. It shows you what's on your network, how it's connected, and the associated risk across public cloud, private cloud, and physical environments. With Red Seal, you'll get control of your cybersecurity fundamentals so you can protect your organization from the inevitable attack vectors and reduce your cyber risk. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/Red Seal.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 178, recorded June 29th, 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado. Joining me from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island is my co-host, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Hey, Matt. Good to be here.
Happy Monday. We had a week off for InfoSec World, and now we're back.
It's Bloody Mary Monday. I declared it Bloody Mary Monday.
All right. You should have told me that. I would have joined you. Speaking of join the Security Weekly mailing list and receive your invite to our community Discord server by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe and clicking the button to join the list. You can interact with over 700 of your fellow listeners. We've got about 150 online right now and a few in the Discord channel during the show. In our first July webcast, you'll learn how to stitch and enrich flow data for security with Viavi Solutions. Register for our upcoming webcasts or virtual trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/webcast or visit securityweekly.com/on-demand to view any of our previously recorded webcasts. Former UK Special Forces officer Graeme Cantu Park is the Chief Information Security Officer of Matillion, a cloud-native ETL software developer. Operating in IT and security, he has held roles with Mason Advisory, Santander, and the Hut Group, specializing in early-stage growth organizations across a range of verticals. Graeme, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Hey, thank you for having me. How are you all?
We're good. Hopefully it's not too late over the pond, as we would say.
Yeah, just coming on 9 p.m. Starting to get a bit dark outside, but it's been gloomy all day. That's Manchester for you.
Yeah, what's new? Before we get into the conversation, I always like to start and get a little background. How did you get into security? Was it through the Special Forces side? How did you get into the security industry?
Sure. So I think I can probably blame my father for that. If I need to blame someone, I kind of grew up surrounded by network cables and whatnot as he worked for British Telecom. It's a big service provider in the UK. Yeah, I guess that kind of got me started on computers full stop. And then as I kind of made my way through school and through into the military, I went straight into the Royal Signals, so communications arm of the British Army. And it was there that I started to get into computing, secure networks, and eventually into cybersecurity itself.
Now, Graeme, I got to know, is that like a pagan... what is that? Is that wallpaper? And is that a goat head person or?
This is a dog. I think it's a bloodhound. Yeah, obviously very very well dressed for the evening.
Nice. And what about the one? What about the one right over? Yeah, that one over your head. Yeah.
I think that's a doe.
Gotcha. That's some very interesting decor. I love it.
I saw it in a local pub and I had to have some. It's a good common piece of Zoom calls.
Yes, I was going to say it's like an old British pub. It's got all that old wallpaper on it, so it fits in perfectly.
Exactly.
So as you made your transition out of Special Forces into the commercial side, what does that what did that career path look like for you to the point where you are as Chief Information Security Officer over at Matillion?
Sure. So I think quite a lot of people leaving the military struggle a little bit on where to go, and you've got people who stay very much in the public sector. Some people who go for, I'll call it a soft landing, and they end up at your Northrop Grumman's, your BAE Systems, somewhere like that that's very heavily militarized anyway. And I really wanted to cut clean from that. So I went to Mason Advisory, which was a small boutique consultancy up in Manchester. And the reason that I did that and went to consulting was just to try and get a bit more broader experience. I wanted something out of uniform and very much out of uniform. I'd been there a short while when I ended up back at the Home Office dealing with police radio networks, which was far too close to the military for my liking, and eventually managed to broker a role with a startup being run out of Santander. And that was when I was really exposed heavily to DevOps, cloud native technologies, and all of the things that the military were no longer leading on. I realized that that was where I really wanted to be. And I moved through some time in security operations with the Hook Group, a big e-commerce retailer, and eventually found a role with Matillion as the CISO. So kind of finally made it up back to the level I was operating at, just with a completely different company than I envisaged when I first left. And it's been a great path so far.
Now, when you think about your role at Matillion, I've seen software CISOs potentially have split responsibility. So I'm curious how the role is managed at Matillion. So let me give you an example. When I was at Qualys, for example, we had a chief information security officer, but not responsible really for product security. More of an outbound, out-facing CISO to work with other CISOs more on the customer side around the security of the platform. Are you more focused on product security, internal security, a combination of both? How would you describe that role?
So the role's quite new to the organization, and they've focused on security in different elements, kind of independent of a CISO office for a while. I've come in and I've focused primarily on corporate security across the enterprise, although the product's been a growing area, and I expect that to be the growth area over the next couple of months.
Got it. Yeah, because it always gets interesting on, is product security owned by the CISOs at a separate group? So I'm always curious how that role kind of plays out in different organizations.
Yeah, I mean, our product team do a good job of it already. You know, they host the kind of security focus groups. They deal with all of the security stories going into the product right now. But look, if something's got a security name on it and a potential security implication down the line, then I want to be involved with it to some extent.
Right. And as you think about the organization, right, you're a cloud native company offering data transfer ETL services. What are some of the unique challenges from a security perspective that you really have to stay focused on?
I don't know if they're so unique to either. Well, there's probably cloud native unique ones. There's ETL native unique ones, and I think there's software native unique ones that, you know, they're all going to be unique based on that particular area of industry. Cloud's great. It takes away a lot of your security headaches from day one and introduces a load of different ones, as you know, and giving people the ability to start services and functions really overnight or within seconds completely changes how you need to do things, because you need to let people have a lot more freedom, but you need to exercise that in a way that's secure. Likewise, if we take it to the software angle, software development, take it one step down from product. You get your product requirements, but then you need developers who really understand an element of security to be able to implement that. And no software developer wants to build an insecure product, because ultimately it's a function of the quality of the code that they're building. But they may take a quicker route to something. They might not understand a particular security implication of what they're doing. Or they might just think that they're building it in the most secure way possible, but have their particular issues that they've introduced. I think I gave you 3 areas that we might have been unique. I guess the last one was data, right? Our core business. And the way we operate is we deploy into a customer environment via an AMI. But we've recently launched a free loading product called Matillion Data Loader for anyone to put data into their cloud warehouse. And we start to have the problems of multi-tenancy within big data environments then, which other people will be aware of. Again, not completely unique to us, but a very different problem than someone who's not dealing with a SaaS platform may have.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk cloud for a second, because you said something interesting, and Paul and I have done some segments on this in the past about the shared responsibility model, right? You said there's a set of things that are kind of taken care of, but then it opens up a whole new set of issues that you have to deal with. You know, obviously some abstraction layers at the network and the endpoint layer are managed by, or could be managed by your cloud provider, depending on how you've deployed, whether you've deployed dedicated EC2 or you're using as a service capabilities. What are some of those unique things you have to account for in the cloud that are those new areas that got opened up when you're in the cloud?
I think one of the phrases you used actually was a really good answer for this question, and it was the could be element. Yes, the cloud provides you with native functionality straight out the box if you wanted to do it that way, or it provides you with compute to be able to build on top of. And unless your teams really understand exactly where that responsibility lies in the infrastructure that they've deployed, you could quite easily have something that a team are pushing out onto the cloud provider, or think they are doing, yet they were meant to configure X, Y, and Z of that, and they haven't done. So really understanding where that responsibility lies and making sure that the teams who are deploying your core infrastructure understand that for every service, of which I don't know how many there are on Amazon at the moment, a lot, is really important. So without that understanding, it's really difficult to make sure that you're not deploying something that's inherently insecure from the off.
Yeah,
Graeme, how do you keep up with the cloud providers changing requirements and services from a security perspective? You know, you can certainly design something and implement something that you believe is secure, but then, you know, as I found with AWS especially, that stuff changes. What advice do you have to keep up with that?
I guess it depends what you mean that's changing in particular, but ultimately you want something that's going to be able to abstract away potentially from AWS, or if you're multi-cloud, from your multi-cloud providers, and give you some kind of continuous assurance that you're configured in a good sense. Yes, you can do that within an AWS console using their own tooling, let's say from a vulnerability point of view, using something like Inspector.
Mm-hmm.
But then as soon as you go over to GCP, of course, you haven't got that same similarity on GCP or on Azure. So you need something that can do this from an agnostic point of view, especially if you're multi-cloud, and do it continuously. So we've worked with a couple of products that will give us that continuous viewpoint, hook into our cloud, and be able to tell us where our security vulnerabilities lie, essentially from a vuln scanning point of view. I'm answering that question anyway.
Yeah, I like that, because you're almost outsourcing that work of keeping up with what is the latest secure configuration, and am I vulnerable to some form of it, right? Like, leave it to someone else. And you got to find the right vendor, of course, right?
Sure. Yeah, so some of it's vendor related. And look, the tooling that AWS, GCP, and Azure and any other of the cloud providers give you is very good. It's just the problem for a lot of people are that they're actually diversifying clouds at the moment and end up hooked into one product that gives them one view of the world.
Yeah, at least you hope they do, right? Anyways. Now, the second area you talked about a bit was on the application security side. And obviously, Paul and I do a lot on the application security side. We just did the Container Security Summit for InfoSec World last week. What are some of the what have you done there to solve some of the interesting challenges with DevOps? How do you integrate some of the security capability into the CI/CD pipeline? What are you guys doing there?
So I think, again, another thing is winning the hearts and minds here, and this is my kind of military terminology coming out, but if you can invest the time with both developers and product teams to make sure that you've got the chance to actually be able to build, that's the first thing that's most important to me. Having your own large AppSec team is really challenging from a recruitment point of view. So you need to be able to fight for time within a sprint or pre-sprint, or have a security sprint to be able to actually address these things, number one. And two, then you need to actually know what you're putting in place. So your static analysis, your dependency analysis, making sure that you're building profiles that are actually notifying developers when they're introducing vulnerability into code. But there are various routes for these vulnerabilities to enter into a pipeline, and making sure that you've got scanning of various levels, I guess, all along that way with feedback to the developers is so important. Building that without creating the same alert fatigue that we've managed to give our SOCs over the years is a challenge into itself.
Yes, I can imagine, right? I mean, you think about the SOC analyst and all the things coming at him from all the different integrated data sources. If you did that to the development staff, think about how unproductive they would actually end up being when it comes to writing code.
Yeah, well, if you get told there's X hundred, X thousand vulnerabilities in a code base from a scanning tool that's not been well configured, that's never going to see the light of day again.
Well, and what I find is developers will just ignore it. Like if I get overwhelmed as a developer, if I get overwhelmed with alerts, I'm like, screw it. I got my features I need to work on. Like I can't even tackle that because it would basically take me off the path so far to sift through all that stuff that I'm just going to go keep writing code and implementing features, right?
And you don't do that because you're wanting to build something insecure. You're doing that because the product team want you to work on product features,
yep.
And at the same time, you want to actually deliver against them. So we need to reconcile that issue by making sure that we're bringing people on board at the earliest stage from a conceptual point of view, but also actually building a good level of a baseline to understand that we're not going to give them X number of vulnerabilities that really solving them isn't going to be worth the squeeze.
Yep.
Yeah. And then that last area, you've got this really interesting crossover into data. And you're moving data, you're loading data, you're allowing customers to do that. What are some of the unique security control requirements around what you have to do to keep that data secure? Because you cross over into that data plane very quickly.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the way our product actually deploys is sat inside a customer VPC. So actually, we share some of the way any of the cloud providers hand off some of the security requirements to the customer, if you like. It's up to them to configure it in certain ways. But when you look at it from a customer viewpoint, using an ETL product, they need to make sure that the data transfer, first off, is actually secure. So you can transfer in a number of different ways into our product. But if you get your basics of transferring over TLS where you can, or something encrypted, that makes things a lot easier. Once you've got all this data together, actually understanding your access scheme and making sure that whoever's got access to that data has access to the right forms of it, and you're not overexposing data once you've got it into a warehouse is really quite key for anyone deploying this kind of technology.
Yeah, are there certain technologies or partnerships that you have to make it easier to protect that data? I mean, I understand the challenges, I think, in the transfer and protecting it, but is there something unique there that you've seen that really makes it easy to help with that encrypted transport and protecting that data and the access to that data once it's in the environment?
Sure, it's quite a timely and interesting question. I spoke to a couple of startups this week, actually, not directly for Matillion, but from an advisory point of view, who were actually solving this problem. Unfortunately, they're at a stage where I can't really give too much away about them at the moment, but there's some really exciting things being done here because it is really it is an issue. There may be technology out there that fits this mold at the moment. But one of the ones that I looked at today was really coming at this from a slightly different angle, and I'm really interested to see when they pull the covers back, what's actually what the uptake is like within the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the three areas we hit on two of them today. We kind of hit on all three. App user data, right? Application security, identity and access, whether it's human or machine, and then data security are those big triads of things that no matter where your applications run, these are important components, right? And what I'd like to see is some more innovation on the data security side, because it's one of the areas we haven't innovated as much in. But look, at the end of the day, people are trying to get to the data. So that's why I'm curious about what types of technologies are coming to really help protect data.
Mm-hmm. I completely see the angle that you're going at, and I'd love to be able to talk about what I've just the piece that I've just been looking at. I think maybe we'll have to come back another time, and hopefully I can sing their praises, because I think what's coming from that particular vendor is going to be very exciting.
All right, we'll keep tabs on that one.
Sure.
You said this is a new role at Matillion. So where in the organization do you report? Who do you report to?
Sure. So I report to the CEO. This was something that was discussed, I believe, in Matillion before I arrived, to try and understand exactly where the role fitted. Did it sit within the CTO's area? Did it sit within the kind of legal and risk area? And it got moved around a few times, I believe. And then when I came to take on the role, I was quite adamant that that's where I think the reporting line should be. And luckily, the alignment had happened beforehand as well. So it was really good to see that an organisation such as Matillion was leaning that way before having to be pushed too hard there. And I think it's really important, having been in a reporting line to a CTO and to a CIO beforehand, and seeing the frustrations that can bring. I think this reporting line definitely makes a lot more sense, especially where you haven't got a chief risk officer, if there was anywhere else to put it.
Right. And the reason I ask is because we see the CISOs reporting to a lot of different roles, the CIO, the CTO, as you said. We're seeing more chief information security officers reporting to the CEO, which I think is a great thing. I'm curious, kind of, what's your interaction with the CEO? How often are you communicating? How is that alignment with security and business actually going?
Sure. Yeah. I speak to the CEO weekly. We have a catch up, well, at least weekly, and then potentially ad hoc in the sidelines. So maybe a little less now that we're not in the office, which has introduced some strange dynamics as a whole. But yeah, have a weekly catch up with him, and making sure that security is aligned to the business. Actually, that was probably the first meeting that I had, was understanding what the business requirement was of this role, what the initial guidelines were to get us moving, and how actually what I was doing could implement things to make that number go up, or to make whatever that business goal was over that shorter period more achievable.
Yeah, and so I assume you've aligned some of the security programs and activities with those business goals. Can you give a little guidance on kind of how you built those? And I'm just curious, some of the potential metrics that you're rolling back up to your executive staff.
Sure. So yeah, like I said, the role was new, so actually building the function in itself was probably the biggest challenge to start with. But the big thing that we've pushed for is compliance against certain frameworks. Now, that directly aligns to the business, because actually, rather than protecting the bottom line, which is a CISO's bread and butter, it's actually enabling the top line and enabling us to go and fight for new custom in certain areas. So making sure that you've got the ticket to go and play essentially in certain markets is really important. And whether that's an ISO 27001, whether that's HIPAA if you're chasing your healthcare providers, or whether that's SOC 2 or something else in between, I think that's a really easy way to start to align against a business goal. You asked about metrics as the kind of second part of that question, I think. And I really struggled with metrics in my last role. It was a very data-driven place in my last place, and we looked really granular at metrics and passed these all the way up to quite senior level within the organization. We're looking at very, very technical, heavy metrics, and I don't think that's the right approach at all. So I've built the metrics program at the moment based on NIST cybersecurity framework, and the capability and maturity model that sits behind that. it's not just from a metrics point of view that I've built that way. It's also to give 5 pillars of common discourse and dialogue and verbiage across the company. And I use these words as regular as I can in every meeting when I have some exposure to people who are slightly outside of tech or security, to make sure that eventually, when I talk about detect or identify or respond, I'm talking the context of one of those words. People have an idea what I'm talking about and why it's important, and where we sit on that maturity modeling against that. And I don't think I'll ever push the metrics anytime soon beyond those 5 pillars and beyond those 5 maturity ratings in each of those pillars.
Oh, interesting. So you use the maturity model against the 5 domains of the cybersecurity framework to kind of measure where you are within your program. I'm curious, one of the ones we tend to forget about is the recovery domain. I'm just curious, being in the cloud, being a data transport kind of layer, I would imagine recovery needs some very interesting requirements in there to keep your system and your service available.
Sure. I've considered why we as an industry forget about this slightly, and I've come up with numerous reasons. I mean, is it because it's the last one out of the 5? Did NIST get tired by the time they were writing all of the controls that they were applying against?
I think that's
areas?
actually a pretty valid point, Graeme.
Maybe they had maybe the contractors to deliver against this and they ran out of time. I don't know. It might have been that actually it starts to get a little bit more boring when you get to there, because you've already responded. The bulk of the work is done, and standing the service back up and returning to normal operations. Well, actually, all the fun's out of it then, and maybe that's the reason that we've only got a couple of requirements there. Or maybe it's the advent of the cloud, and actually people said, well, recovery is maybe a bit easier in cloud. We don't need to worry so much about RPOs and RTOs to the same level, because everything's just click a button and we're kind of there. I don't know what the real reason is that NIST got diluted and the industry kind of dilutes to that end of the scale. But there's certainly different problems that we then interact with because of it.
I think the most important aspect of recovery is testing your recovery. Like, the most important requirement is to make sure that you test it, right? Because it's all well and good, as we know, with backups and other things, to go, yeah, I can recover, but you have to prove it, right? And that's, in the instance that I've worked where things have gone horribly wrong, is we thought certain things were in place and they weren't, and then recovery takes longer and longer and longer, and can have more and more of a negative impact to the business.
Sure. There's a saying that I'll take. I don't know if it translates to US military as well, where I'm guessing most of the watchers of this podcast are. But we always had the adage of train hard and fight easy. Much better to continually practice and train that recovery plan, so that when it does come to that problem day, you've tried it, and you've tried it in the best conditions, and you've tried it in the worst. And we had a training exercise a while back where I was out somewhere that day. The fire alarm went off where I was. My internet dropped out from the office that I was in, and I was on a 4G dongle. Everything that could possibly go wrong right as the bloom went up started to go wrong. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be that there's a problem with your data. It can be a problem with the whole kind of command structure that's sat around that recovery effort.
Yeah, it's almost an extension of chaos engineering that goes into the physical realm as well, right? It's super important to be able to train for.
Exactly.
Graeme, I think it's interesting that you took a higher level maturity model versus the lower level metrics, but I see why, right? Because I think sometimes we get wrapped around the axle with the technical metrics, and if they're not aligned up to the business goals, which is not easy, by the way, then trying to report on those, just they don't relate back to the business folks. So it's interesting that you took more of a maturity against the different domains in this cybersecurity framework as a way to report back to the business.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it go horribly wrong when you're reporting things like number of times a certain firewall rule is fired to someone who sits wholly outside of technology and realistically sits there probably slightly dumbfounded, slightly at ease during a briefing and maybe just shuts up to get on with it. And I think if you're not getting that dialogue back and forth between either an exec leadership team or a board or any other level when you brief these metrics, well, you're talking the wrong stuff. If you don't have some two-way dialogue and some talk back to it, then people aren't really understanding it. And if they don't understand it and there's the fear of actually asking the question, then you're onto a losing game.
Interesting. Paul, any additional questions while we have Graeme on the line?
No, this was awesome.
Graeme, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Perfect. Thank you all very much. And maybe we'll speak again soon.
Yes. We'll have to circle back on that data conversation at some point.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to. And I think it won't be too long.
All right. Awesome. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.